If you've been binge watching moving to Europe videos trying to picture your own life abroad, I need you to stop for a second because almost none of that advice applies to where you're actually going. You're not moving to Europe, you're moving to Albania. And yes, I know it's in Europe, but it still breaks almost every rule in those Europe videos. The banking system works differently, the housing market works differently, the tax situation completely different. And if you show up here with a Portugal playbook, you're going to be in for a surprise. I've lived abroad twice, over 7 years in China and over a year here in Toronto. And through Canucks Abroad, I've helped people navigate this exact transition. So if you're tired of the generic advice and you're at the point where you want to know if you can actually pull this off, stay to the end where I break down the 6 signs that will help you decide. So grab your coffee and let's dive in. Now, every one of these videos on moving abroad talks about the dip, right? The honeymoon phase, then reality hits, then you level out. The honeymoon phase, and then the dip, and then you level out, right? 3 act story. Here's the thing though, I've done this twice, and it's never been that tidy either time. In China, honestly, the honeymoon phase never really ended. Not one day went by that I didn't think, wow, I actually live here. Whether it was good or wow, I can't believe I live here. And I remember one time sitting by a lake with summer, and it was such a beautiful lake. It was at a park near our house, and we were sitting there. The sun was setting. There's, like little pathways and benches alongside, and people would sit there, mostly couples. You can rent a paddle boat and go along the lake. And I said out loud, wow, this would be so nice to share this with someone. Which at that point, I was lost in my own thoughts. And at that point, the little head went on my shoulder, and in the deepest, most masculine voice this tiny little girl can muster, I got, I'm lonely too. So the point that I'm making is even though the honeymoon phase never really ended, loneliness can still creep up in there. And that, for me anyway, is closer to the truth than the honeymoon dip and level out. Albania gave me a different version, but of the same lesson. As a Canadian, we only get 90 days, so visa free. So we hit the ground running. There was not really any easing into it. And here, money was tighter than it ever was in China. In China, money flowed. Here, not the case. So we didn't really get a chance to explore much of the country until we were already living here over a year in. But that wow moment is still here. And I want to be specific about what that wow is. Because it's not the scenery. I grew up in Canada in the most beautiful place. I lived in just outside of Vancouver where we had the ocean and the mountains. Like the Rockies are absolutely beautiful. It has its own type of wow. This is not what I'm talking about. It's the wow of a life without the pressure. Income is lower here, sure, but so is everything else that you're spending it on. And even earning some of our income locally, I'm still in a better financial position than I would be in Canada. That's the real difference between the honeymoon and dip story you've probably heard and what actually happens when you land somewhere like Albania. Now, before you get swept up in the wow, let's talk about the first 6 months because that's where those Europe videos and an Albania move start to split apart. So, depending on your passport, your clock will start differently. As a Canadian, we get 90 days. As American, you get 365. So, whatever passport you're holding, make sure you look up your specific number before you leave because that number will decide how fast you have to move. And once you're here, you're rebuilding your entire phone book from scratch. Not just a doctor or a dentist, but your vet, your pet store, the places that you actually need, clinics, grocery stores, your go to shops, and then the bureaucracy. That is the real test. Here's what nobody tells you: the rules don't come from a rule book, They come from whoever's sitting behind the desk that day. For example, I went to register my address for residency. Okay. I was told that I don't need that lease to be notarized, which when you submit it, it doesn't. It didn't need to be. And I was told it didn't need to be to register my address either. So I went down to my local office and they told me it had to be notarized. When I spoke with the school that I work with, because I deal with foreigners doing this all the time, they were like, no, it doesn't need to be notarized. This office doesn't. So I went to that office and they were like, no, it doesn't need to be notarized. You're fine. But we can't register you here. You have to register in your neighborhood. I was like, okay. So I went back and I was like, okay, well, they said at this office it doesn't need to be. They were pretty much telling me, I don't care what they're saying. It needs to be notarized. So rules, it depends on who's working. And that is why when you look at information for Albania, it depends on who you're dealing with at that point in time. It can be very strict or it can be very lax. There's no appealing to logic. You just follow whatever you've been handed. And then you find out that the rules changed the moment you thought you understood them. Welcome to Albania. Now, no matter what country you move to, one thing stays true. Housing is the hardest part. I've done this search a few times now in different countries, and it never gets easier. It just gets different. When we were house hunting here, our goal was 5 to 600 euros. Now, at the time, I remember reading online not to give them the high end of your number because they will find you something outside of that. So what we did is we told them that it was about 500. That was our max. So this way here, if they did push it to 600, we had that buffer to play with. And we went through so many different real estate agents who did just that, gave us, I think, 900 is what they were bringing us back to. And then I was like, no, I know that I could find this cheaper. And I ended up finding this real estate agent that we work with, and she was phenomenal. Not only did she hook us up with a 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom with an amazing view, she did it under budget. Our monthly rent, 450. And she's also helped other people with find great places too. I'll make sure that there's a link. You can fill out your information and she'll get back to you. It'll be down below. So if you take one tip from this whole video, take this one. Whatever your top number is, quote it lower to your agent. I'll link her info below if you want someone that works for you instead of against your wallet. It'll be down there. Now, if you have questions about any of this, drop them in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more, the Patreon group is where I share behind the scenes stuff, access to quizzes, and website members get deeper tools as well, including the cost of living calculator. And if you're still not sure if you're in the ready to do this phase, I built a quiz exactly for that. The link will be below, and we're going to touch base on that again near the end of this video. Now, somewhere around 6 months in, something shifts. You stop pulling up the map every time you need to leave the house. You know which vendors have the good produce. You probably get a discount. And you've probably stopped flinching every time somebody travels 4 lanes of traffic. That's when you know you've landed, not just arrived. Now, right around that same settling in point is right around the same time that people start thinking about taxes. And here's where the passport you're holding actually matters. For my American friends watching, the US is one of only a small handful of countries on earth that taxes citizens on worldwide income, no matter where you live. It doesn't matter if you're in Albania or somewhere else, you're filing. Now, what can help is the foreign earned income exclusion. It's not a deduction, it's an exclusion. There's a difference, which lets you exclude a chunk of foreign earned income from US tax. Now, I'm not an accountant, so talk to one about your specific numbers, but know that it does exist. Because I've met people years into their move who didn't even know that it was an option and ended up having to pay taxes that they didn't have to. Now, for my fellow Canadians, this works completely different. Canada's taxes are based on residency, not citizenship. So if you genuinely sever your ties, you don't have a home waiting for you, no spouse, dependents, You can become a non-resident and stop owing taxes on your worldwide income altogether. The catch? The day you officially leave, Canada treats it like you sold everything you own, capital gains wise. It's called a deemed disposition or departure exit tax. So there's no free exit, it's just a different toll booth. Either way, though, no matter which country you're from, talk to a professional who knows your home country rules and Albania's. This isn't something you want to guess your way through. So healthcare is another one that people get wrong in both directions. They think either it's free or it's as expensive as the US, and neither of those are true. First, free. Public healthcare isn't really free anywhere. It's a contribution system. People pay into it their whole working life. What people mean by cheap is closer to the truth than free. So here's what that looks like in practice. A visit to a private doctor here will cost you about 30 euros. Cheap enough that people just pay cash for the small stuff rather than bothering with insurance claims. Where insurance actually earns its keep is the big stuff: hospitalization, major diagnosis, emergency evacuation. That's the real reason to carry a policy, not the 30 euro visit, but the thing that could actually bankrupt you. This is why I recommend IMG Global and international citizens. You don't want an insurance plan for the 30 euro visits. You want one for the catastrophic stuff. I'll link it below. And this way here, you can get a quote and see what it'll actually cost. International Citizens is also a broker, so it will compare different companies for you. Now, the people part. And this is where I'm going to get a little bit more cynical than most of these other videos get. Here's what I learned living in China. Don't get attached to other expats. Befriend them, absolutely, but hold it loosely. Expats move. You spend 9 months getting close to someone, and then they're off to the next country or back home, and you're genuinely happy for them. But it doesn't take away that sting, and it leaves you on your toes. So make sure you make friends with real locals instead, especially if you're planning on being here long term. If you're not planning on being here long term, then absolutely have at it. But if you're looking for something long term, make friends with the locals. Not only will it help you integrate properly, but in 2 years from now, there's a higher chance they're still going to be there. Now, I've spent a lot of this video talking about the hard parts, so let me say this clearly. The beautiful parts are real too. Snorkeling off the coast in Himara, a herd of goats following you unprompted up a hill because they decided they're going to tag along for the walk. But there's a second layer to this payoff, and that's the proximity. You're sitting on the edge of the Mediterranean. I've flown to Italy for the cost of a lunch out back home. You aren't just moving to one country, you're gaining access to a whole continent. And it costs you less to explore it than it did to drive to the next city over in Canada or America. And that's the return on investment, not just the scenery, but the total removal of the friction you were used to back home. And that's not a highlight reel, that's just life here. So there's a phrase here, Avash, Avash, which means slowly, slowly. And that's the entire cafe culture in 2 words. Sit, you don't rush, take your time. And there's nobody clearing your table to turn it over for profit. And that slow vibe is great, but don't mistake it for modern convenience. Most of that moving to Europe videos tell you you don't need a car. And if you're moving to Toronto, that part is true. But if you're living outside of the capital, you might want to rethink that. There's no subway systems here. There's no functioning rail network. Your only ways in, out, or around car, bus, boat, or plane. That's it. If you want to see the mountains or the coast, or honestly just live outside any city center, you are eventually going to want a car. You can absolutely rely on the Furgon network to get between cities, but that's a different kind of experience, not a transit system. It's an adventure, and you should plan accordingly. Geographically, this country makes no sense, but in the best way. You have high altitude mountains and tropical looking beaches just a few hours apart. You're also a short, cheap flight away from the rest of Europe. I've flown to Italy for the cost of lunch back home. But be honest of where you're landing. If you aren't in Tirana, don't land here expecting a transit-rich European lifestyle, because that's not what this is. Month or so back, I asked my audience directly, what is the number one thing keeping you stuck right now in your home country? Not hypothetically, I wanted real answers. So here's what came back. So, number one was cost of selling and moving logistics by a wide margin. Family and caregiving duties came in second. Job and remote work and healthcare pre existing conditions came in third. So, let's actually go through those because just figure out if you're ready isn't useful if the thing stuck in your way has a name. So if logistics and moving costs are your blocker, that's the biggest of the group. So you're definitely not alone. And this is why I spent time on the housing section earlier. Get a real local agent and quote low and get real numbers instead of just guessing at what a move will actually cost. The fear is usually bigger than what the number is once you actually price it out. If it's healthcare or a pre-existing condition, that's what international insurance exists for. It's worth getting an actual quote before assuming you're not coverable because the answer is often better than people expect. If it's your job not transferring, we're going to talk about this in a minute, income has to travel with you. There's no way around it. Sometimes that means finding a remote job in your field, and sometimes it means rethinking what you actually do for income once you're here. Now, if it's family or caregiving, I want to tell you a personal story here because I don't think a generic tip will help with this one. Now, my mom and I had a difficult relationship most of my life. I grew up in foster care and we were never close. When she was diagnosed with lung cancer, she didn't want me to know, but her friend thought I should, so she told me on the DL. About 6 months later, I decided to move to China. When I told my mom that I was leaving, that's when she told me about her diagnosis. And I was so thankful her friend told me because I think that would have made it so much harder. But I had already made the decision with that knowledge, thankfully. And she had asked me to stay and take care of her. So I had a choice to make. Now, I knew that if I stayed, I would always resent her. Okay. Like we weren't on the best of terms. And that resentment would just blow up. And I'd always wonder what if. But also, if I go, I know that there's a good chance that something will happen when I'm living on the other side of the world. I chose to go anyway. And because of that distance, we actually got along better than we ever had. For the first time in my life, she told me she was proud of me. I moved in March of 2016, and she passed in April of 2018. That summer, I was supposed to fly home to go visit her. So instead of visiting her, I went back and picked up her ashes. So it's a sad story, yes, but I choose to focus on it being a beautiful story because for the last 2 years of her life, we got along. The last 2 years were the best 2 years we've ever had. And I don't regret the choice I made. So if you're weighing a caregiving situation against a move, ask yourself one question. If something happens while you're living abroad, can you live with that? And if the answer is no, don't go. And if the answer is yes, that doesn't make you a bad person. That makes you somebody who thought things through. Now, how to know if you're ready? Here's the 6 things I tell people. Number 1, your income has to travel with you before you go. Remote job, passive income, doesn't matter which one, business, anything. You need to make sure you have the funds. Something that does not keep you in Canada or the US to keep earning an income. Number 2, income first, visa second. I don't recommend moving here and figuring it out. That's fine for a vacation or a scouting trip, but not long term permanently. Number 3, the only thing left is fear test. If the only thing standing between you and Albania is paperwork and the nervous voice in your head, not money, not logistics, you're ready. You'll know if that's you. Number 4, have 3 to 6 months of savings in the bank. On top of whatever your ongoing income is, you should have something to fall back on. I can't stress that enough. Bail this out because there's going to be unforeseen things. There's going to be unforeseen expenses. There's going to be unforeseen circumstances. Paperwork takes longer. Something costs more. There's something that you didn't see happening. Have that backup. Don't leave home without it. 5, if the math isn't genuinely there yet, don't force it. Get your financial picture clean. Talk to an accountant or tax professional. Get everything lined up. And instead of trying to figure out all of Albania, narrow it down to a city. I made a full video on exactly that. I'll link it down below. And number 6, it's fine to give yourself another year. if you have an actual date attached to it. Selling a house, retirement date, landing a job that lets you work from here. That's not stalling, that's sequencing. But notice the difference between the last one and just stalling. A real date attached to a real plan is sequencing. No date, no plan, that's just stalling. At some point, research stops being preparation and starts becoming procrastination. And I see this all the time. People have watched every video, favorited some cities, and know the neighborhood demographics of Toronto better than their own hometown, but haven't taken a single concrete step. And if that's you, be honest with yourself. You aren't preparing to move. You're using research as a substitute for action. You're living in a fantasy of what life could be because you're not really ready yet to make that messy logistical work of what it would be. If you've been researching for a year and you haven't taken that first step, whether it's talking to a professional or getting a job, you're making sure your income's getting lined up, something, you're just keeping yourself stuck. Deep down, you already know it. And every time I talk to someone who finally made the move, they all say the same version of the same thing. I wish I did this sooner. Now, if you're sold on Albania, the next question is, what city? Now, I've already made that video. You can click right here and I'll walk you right through it. And I'll see you in the next one.